Hello and welcome to this Advective weather update. Lee has recently become a hurricane over the open Atlantic this afternoon and is continuing to develop, as you can see in the satellite imagery. Very intense thunderstorms blowing up over the centre, those pinks indicating very cold cloud-top temperatures, but no significant organisation at this time, and it hasn't begun rapidly intensifying. Which isn't really a good or bad thing, because it's going to have more than enough time to intensify without hitting any landmass in the short term. Looking at the forecast for the next 5 days, we can see why. It's going to stay well north of the Lesser Antilles, currently with winds of 75 miles per hour, pressure in 991 millibars, moving to the west-northwest at 14 miles an hour. And as I said, it is continuing to steadily strengthen at this time, and will likely become a rapidly intensifying storm tomorrow, but it could take until Friday morning for that to start. Once it gets going, there's nothing to stop it besides itself, and by that I mean idle replacement cycles, and it will become a very intense hurricane, probably one of the strongest in this part of the Atlantic on record, with certainly record-breaking intensity forecasts from the National Hurricane Center, forecasting 150 miles an hour late Saturday into Sunday. They show it's weakening slightly in the longer term, as idle replacement cycles are expected, and model intensity does trend down slightly because of that. However, beyond that, there's no reason to say it won't re-strengthen, and of course, at any point during this, it could be above the forecast, because there is, of course, some uncertainty in the forecast, and that, just the standard uncertainty, would put you into Category 5 territory on the upper end. Given that it's going to rapidly intensify, uncertainty is higher, it could be a very strong storm. And of course, the record warm sea surface temperatures, not impacted by Franklin, at least during the next 5 days. It's got all the fuel it needs to get to Category 5, if it so chooses. We will see what happens. Now, that's not to say there won't be any impacts to land whatsoever. There won't be any major impacts to land. There will still be dangerous surf, potentially life-threatening rip currents, and there is a low chance of tropical storm force winds across the northernmost Leeward Islands. However, it's most likely going to stay well north of that, as you'll see in a moment. In the longer term, though, questions raised about where it will go. Will it continue west and perhaps bring some impacts to the Bahamas before it turns north? Will it turn north early and impact Bermuda? And really far out, we just don't know where it's going to go. It could impact the Carolinas, it could impact New England, it could impact Canada, or it could miss land entirely and stay out to sea and bring less impacts than Franklin did. We just have to wait and see. We really can't say anything, and anyone who's trying to tell you otherwise is lying for various reasons. But, important thing, very powerful storm is coming. After that point, we can't say what will happen just yet, so stay tuned to later updates once we know better what Lee will do in the long term. Now, here is the model output from the HWRF model. I've taken the parent view, which is zoomed out a bit so you can see more of what's going on around the storm. And you can see it safely passes to the north of the Leeward Islands and the Greater Antilles. Very minor impacts there from the winds at least. There will be the rough surf and rip currents, as I mentioned, and those will also spread to the Bahamas and Bermuda and parts of the coastal United States going into next week. And you can see this does intensify at a very substantial rate tomorrow into the weekend. One point to note is that it peaks in intensity on Saturday and is already weakening by Sunday, which is entirely possible. Idle replacement cycles could do that. But the peak intensity HWRF is 130 knots, exactly in line with the NHC forecast, which is primarily why I chose this model. It's the best representation of the National Hurricane Center forecast in any of the current models in a graphical sense. And you can see that as it goes through those cycles, it gets bigger. And that's going to be a concern going into next week with this hurricane, is that not only will it be very intense, not only will it potentially reach Category 5 on one or more occasions, that's not the question, it will be a large storm, and of course as all hurricanes move north, they grow even bigger, which increases the likelihood of at least tropical storm impacts to Bermuda, or the coast of the US, or the coast of Canada. And I'd just like to reiterate, we don't know what's going to happen in the long run, and it could miss all land masses entirely with a perfect track, or it could be a devastating landfall somewhere. We obviously hope that it stays well out to sea. We'll have to wait until next week to know with more certainty where it's going to end up. That's all for Lee today. Moving on to Hurricane Jova, which is an incredible storm at the moment on satellite, rapidly intensified as a pinhole hurricane over the eastern Pacific, from nothing to at least Category 4 in less than 2 days. Now I say at least because even though it's only been 2 hours since the last NHC update, the satellite presentation has improved so much that it could be a Category 5 right now. And we'll have to wait and see what the next NHC update says. However, it's unlikely to maintain that peak intensity for very long because it's a small pinhole, very likely to go into an IROR replacement cycle, which will bring the intensity down, and then it won't have another chance to get back to Category 5. That'll be it. It'll be weakening from whichever point onwards it starts weakening. It's probably peaking right now. So, winds of 130 miles an hour as of a couple of hours ago. But obviously, in a pinhole, that's a lot of time. The pressure was 953 millibars as of the last NHC update, and it is moving to the northwest at 15 miles an hour. We will see this storm gradually weaken, remaining well out to sea, no impacts to land. As you can see, tropical storm force wind probabilities not anywhere near the coast of Mexico, which is a great change from the relatively recent Hillary. One point to note is that there will of course be substantial surf and rip current potential along the coast of Mexico and California from this system, but it won't be as bad because the hurricane will be weakening as it moves north, so as it gets closer, not as strong. So it'll be an extended duration of good surf, but there will still be those rip currents to worry about, but not anything too extreme. So I'm sure the surfers in California will be excited for that. Anyway, that's all we have time for today. Hope you're staying safe wherever you are in the world, and thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.